Two men stood in an alley behind a restaurant. They had been standing there for 20 minutes, dressed in black, ski masks pulled down over their faces, gloves on, and completely still, watching a church 20 paces away. Inside that church, there were flowers, a pastor at a pulpit, families in pews, holding each other up, trying to get through the hardest hour most of them had ever faced. A horse-drawn carriage waited at the curb. The casket was at the front of the sanctuary. The men in the alley watched all of it. And then they started walking. One of them was carrying a firearm fitted with an extended magazine. They crossed the street, walked past the limousine parked at the curb, walked past the horse. Two cameras mounted on the outside of that church caught every step of what followed. 20 rounds in under 2 minutes. A man chased around a parked car and shot 13 times. A woman clutching him in terror, not realizing she was keeping him from running. People leaping over a casket, crawling on hands and knees toward the altar. The horse outside was shot. When it stopped, 6 people were down, and the man they had all come to say goodbye to was still sitting in the middle of it all. Because everyone who loved him had run. His name was John James Hornezes Jr. He was 20 years old. He grew up on Pittsburgh's north side, the kind of community where the same faces show up at the corner store and the bus stop and the school pickup line year after year. The kind of place where your family knows your neighbors and your neighbors know your business, and being known is just part of living there. John found basketball early. He came up through the Pittsburgh Project and Urban Impact, 2 organizations built specifically to give young people in that neighborhood more than just somewhere to be. They gave structure, purpose, something to work toward. He carried that through Allegheny Elementary, through Allegheny Middle School, all the way into Alderdice High School. On the court, people who knew him agreed he knew what he was doing. He was not easy to pin down on paper. 20 years old, somewhere in the middle of figuring things out, the way most people that age are. People who loved him said so openly. He had energy. He had personality. He also got caught up in the pull of the streets, claimed his block, ran with a crew, posted videos online. To him and the people around him, it probably felt like just being young. Before we go any further, if you're someone who needs to understand why people do the things they do, you're exactly where you should be. This is the Malice Mind. Subscribe if you haven't already. Now, back to John. The day before he was killed, he posted a video. He was surrounded by his people. He was laughing. He looked like a young man with absolutely nothing pressing on him. He had no idea he had less than 24 hours left. While John was on that video, someone else was already watching it, not celebrating him, calculating. His name was Sh0t. He and John moved through the same neighborhoods, orbited the same corners, carried the same kind of pride that the streets reward and that has no easy off-ramp. At some point, the overlap between them stopped being coincidence and started being friction. At a party, it came to a head. Words were exchanged, the kind that are not really about words. And before Troutman walked away, he looked at John and said what he said without any ambiguity. "It is not over. Watch your back." John heard it. He still went out. The 15th of October, 2022, Cedar Avenue, North Side, Pittsburgh. The 300 block of Sunoco gas station on the corner. Bus stops. Ordinary people. Finishing ordinary days. Nothing about it announced itself as unusual. Jalen Hines, 21 years old, and Sh0t were already there. They had not arrived by chance. According to investigators, they had positioned themselves near the station with their attention fixed on a specific black SUV, a vehicle connected to John and the people around him. They were not there to talk. When the SUV began to pull away from the pump, they opened fire. The people inside the vehicle fired back. What followed was an exchange of gunfire on a public street. At a nearby bus stop, two women were waiting. Betty Jean Averytt was 59 years old. She had no connection to John Hornezes, no connection to Troutman or Hines, no part in any of what had been building on those blocks. She was waiting for a bus to take her home. Jacqueline C. Mahalik was 33 years old. Same story. Just a woman at a bus stop going home. Both were shot and killed. John Hornezes was struck during the shooting and found dead at the scene. Investigators noted a firearm was on him. 3 people dead. 2 of them with no connection to the conflict that caused it. None. Not one thread. They were just there. Detectives David O'Neill and Edward Feller caught the Cedar Avenue triple homicide. The scene was wide, shell casings spread across multiple blocks. Witnesses in various states of shock, some of them already gone by the time officers arrived, because that is what happens when guns go off on a city street. People scatter, and they don't always come back to tell you what they saw. What investigators had in their favor was footage. 17 separate camera angles, city cameras up and down Cedar Avenue. The Sunoco station's own system, footage from Allegheny Commons nearby. Every angle was pulled, every timestamp was cross-referenced. One thread climbed above the rest. Cameras had Jalon Hines before the shooting, on foot, moving toward the gas station, stopping near a playground and waiting, positioning himself. His face was on camera, his jacket, his posture, and after the gunfire, the same cameras picked him up again, limping away, a wound to the back of his leg. Less than 5 minutes after the shooting, he walked through the entrance of Allegheny General Hospital. Same clothes, same jacket, still carrying on his body exactly what the cameras had already documented. That footage was played in court later. It was, in the language of investigators, devastating. But building a case that could actually move through a courtroom is not the same as knowing what you know. Every piece had to be corroborated. Every connection had to be documented in a way that would not collapse under cross-examination. That takes time, and it takes resources. Hines, Troutman, and Samuel Pugies were eventually arrested and charged in connection with the Cedar Avenue killings. 3 people dead. 2 of them had simply been waiting for public transportation. The investigation continued. The arrests were still being processed. The legal machinery was still turning. And 13 days after Cedar Avenue, John Hornezes Jr. needed to be buried. His family arranged a full service at Destiny of Faith Church on Brighton Road in Pittsburgh's Brighton Heights neighborhood. A horse-drawn carriage, flowers. Pastor Brenda Gregg had prepared her sanctuary to receive the grief of everyone who had loved him. John's godmother, Paige Davis, was there. His family had done everything right, everything a family does when they are trying to hold on to some last piece of dignity for someone who died too young. Reports indicate that in the days before the service, members of John's family reached out and requested police protection at the funeral. They were not being cautious for no reason. They understood what had happened on Cedar Avenue. They understood that a funeral, everyone connected to John in one building, at a publicly known time and location, was an opportunity. And they had a feeling that someone might recognize that. What that request received in response, and whether what was put in place was adequate, has never been answered with clarity. That question still sits out in the open. What is on camera is what actually happened. Two figures appear in the alley behind Pittsburgh's chicken and fish restaurant. Steps from the church. They are dressed in all black, ski masks pulled down, gloves. They face the building. They study the entrance. They watch who goes in and who comes out. A camera on the outside of the church caught all of it. They stood there for 20 minutes. Inside, Pastor Greg was still preparing. Paige Davis was in the pews. Flowers were at the altar. People were settling in for a service that was supposed to give them somewhere to put all of that grief. Not one of them had any idea what was 20 paces away. When the men in the alley finally moved, they did not leave. They walked toward the church. At 12 minutes past noon, they came out of the alley for the second time. One of them was carrying a gun fitted with an extended magazine. They crossed the street, walked past the limousine, walked past the horse and the carriage. Two cameras on the exterior of Destiny of Faith Church were rolling the entire time. Hezekiah Nixon moved to the side of the building and opened fire, not aimed at any one individual, just into the range of whoever was there. Sean Davis went to the front. He locked onto a man standing on the sidewalk and immediately gave chase, following him around a parked car and shooting continuously. That man was shot 13 times. A woman nearby had grabbed onto him in a panic. She held on, frozen, not understanding that she was the reason he could not get clear. He took shot after shot, 13 of them. He survived. Outside, the horse that had come to carry John's casket was struck by gunfire. Inside, the sound of shots tore through the middle of everything. People dropped. One man leaped directly over John's open casket and crawled toward the altar. Others went down behind pews and stayed down. The city's ShotSpotter system registered 2 separate bursts, approximately 5 rounds. Then, approximately 15, 20 total, all of it in under 2 minutes. Then Davis and Nixon ran back through the alley. 6 people were down. 5 had been shot. A 6th was injured in the chaos of people trying to escape. 1 was in critical condition. The others were listed as stable. Police units from multiple zones arrived. Commander Richard Ford of the Pittsburgh Police Department stood in front of reporters and confirmed what investigators already suspected: more than one gunman, a connection to an ongoing dispute between groups. Investigators went to work on the footage. A Hyundai Elantra was caught on cameras near the church in the aftermath of the shooting. Earlier recordings from the McKees Rocks Bridge showed 2 masked individuals inside that same vehicle, wearing clothing that matched precisely what the shooters had worn outside the church. The license plate was traced. The Elantra came back registered to 19-year-old Sean Davis. Officers found it parked half a block from his home in McKees Rocks, Allegheny County. And here is where the case gets harder to process. Davis had been on house arrest before the shooting. He had an ankle monitor, and at some point prior, he had posted a video online walking people through exactly how he removed that monitor and put it back on without triggering any alert. He was bragging for anyone on the internet to see. That same man had just chased someone around a parked car outside a church and shot them 13 times. At approximately 5:40 that evening, officers spotted both Davis and Nixon climbing into the Elantra. They moved in. The stop happened on the McKees Rocks Bridge. Nixon jumped from the vehicle and ran. He pulled his gun and threw it over the railing into the river. Davis stayed with the car and dropped his weapon on the road. Over the radio came the words the investigation had been building toward. 2 in custody. Divers went into the river and recovered the gun Nixon had thrown. When investigators ran it, it came back, tied to other crimes. Both men were taken to Allegheny County Jail. In court, their attorneys argued that the shooters in the footage were masked and therefore unidentifiable. The judge reviewed the clothing match, the vehicle, the plate, the timeline, the recovered weapons, and rejected the argument entirely. Both were ordered to stand trial. They had planned it. They had almost disappeared. But the cameras, the car, and their own choices left a trail a blind person could have followed. Hezekiah Nixon was 16 years old when he walked to the side of Destiny of Faith Church and opened fire on a room full of people attending a funeral. That is where this section has to begin. 16. And yet, what the surveillance footage documents is not a teenager losing control. It is not an impulsive act born in a heated moment. What the cameras recorded is two people who dressed specifically, traveled deliberately, concealed their identities, surveilled a building for 20 minutes, coordinated their approach, and then executed what they came to do. Behavioral analysts refer to this pattern as organized offender behavior, the capacity to plan, execute, and in the process, suppress the kind of moral and emotional response that stops most human beings before they ever reach step one. The planning is not a minor detail. It is diagnostic. It tells you something specific about how these two individuals were capable of relating to what was about to happen. Some researchers would frame what Nixon and Davis displayed as consistent with traits associated with what is called the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy, not as a formal diagnosis, but as a recognizable behavioral pattern. The capacity to treat other people as instruments in the service of a goal. The ability to walk through a crowd of grieving families without any apparent hesitation, to turn a space of mourning into a target without visible conflict. Sean Davis bragging online about removing his ankle monitor is worth examining separately from the shooting itself. Behavioral analysts describe that kind of public display as consistent with what is sometimes called an absence of perceived consequence, a demonstrated belief, whether fully conscious or not, that the systems designed to contain behavior are not a real threat, that confidence does not appear from nowhere. It is usually built through a series of moments in which nothing happened, no intervention, no consequence that landed hard enough to register. He posted that video. Days later, he was at a church with a gun. But there is a layer beneath the two men that the analysis cannot ignore. Consider the chain in its entirety: a territorial dispute in one neighborhood, a confrontation at a party, a threat that nobody walked away from, willing to let go. An ambush at a gas station where 3 people were killed, 2 of them women at a bus stop who had nothing to do with any of it. Then a funeral, then a church. Then 6 more people shot, one of them critically. Forensic researchers and gang violence specialists describe this pattern as retaliatory escalation, a cycle in which each act of violence is framed internally as a proportional answer to what came before it. Nobody inside the cycle believes they started it. Everyone believes they are correcting an imbalance. And because that logic never reaches resolution, because the ledger never actually closes, the cycle continues until something external stops it. The people who absorb the consequences are almost never the ones driving the cycle. Betty Jean Averytt was 59 years old. She was at a bus stop. Jacqueline C. Mahalik was 33. Same story. Neither of them appeared in any threat, any dispute, any calculation made by anyone involved. A bystander who witnessed the aftermath of the church shooting said that seeing the weapon Hezekiah Nixon carried reminded him of Vietnam. He was not reaching for a metaphor. He was describing what he actually saw on a city street in Pittsburgh in 2022. That is what no behavioral framework can fully account for. The research can explain how someone arrives at a point where they are capable of doing this. It cannot explain why the people who pay the price are always the ones who never chose to be involved. The question worth leaving here is not what was wrong with Hezekiah, Nixon, or Sean Davis. It is what was already broken in the environment, in the systems, in the response to warning signs long before either of them ever picked up a weapon. Hezekiah Nixon pleaded guilty to multiple counts of aggravated assault and 1 count of criminal conspiracy. He was sentenced to 11 to 22 years in state prison. He was 19 at sentencing. He was 16 when he chose to walk toward that church. Sean Davis was still awaiting trial at the time of the latest available reporting. Deputy District Attorney Emma Sh0t stood in court and said it plainly. John Hornez's casket had become a crime scene. His pallbearers were the Pittsburgh police. Pittsburgh police officers walked into Destiny of Faith Church after the shooting and carried John James Hornez Jr. to the hearse. Not his family, not the people who had driven across the city to say goodbye. Police officers, because everyone else had fled. Betty Jean Averytt was 59. She was going home. Jacqueline C. Mahalik was 33. She was going home. John Hornez was 20. He never made it to the end of his own farewell. Cases like this remind us that behind every headline is a life that existed fully, completely, right up until someone decided it shouldn't. If that thought stays with you, it should. Drop your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one. And if the Malice mind is where you come to understand the darkest corners of the human mind, subscribe. We're just getting started.